The weight of the house pressed down on me, a suffocating blanket woven from shattered dreams and bitter memories. It wasn't just the mortgage, the endless upkeep, or the ghosts of a life I once thought I had. It was the name still emblazoned on the deed, a constant, mocking reminder of the man who had systematically dismantled my world. Mark. Even the sound of his name was a physical ache, a dull throb behind my eyes that had become a permanent fixture since the divorce. I stood in the empty living room, the afternoon sun casting long, lonely shadows where our furniture used to be, where our pets used to nap, where laughter had once, impossibly, echoed. Now, only silence, punctuated by the frantic drumming of my own heart, filled the space. Selling this house was supposed to be my liberation, the final, agonizing step in severing every last tie to a past that had nearly consumed me. I had envisioned a clean break, a fresh start in a smaller, anonymous apartment, a place where I could finally breathe without the phantom scent of his cologne or the echo of his manipulative whispers. The for sale sign outside, a beacon of hope to anyone else, felt like a cruel joke to me. We had a buyer, a lovely young couple eager to start their own life within these walls, and the closing date was looming. Everything was in place, meticulously handled by my weary lawyer, except for one critical signature, Mark's. He had taken everything else. Our joint savings, meticulously built over years, vanished into accounts I never knew existed. Our shared belongings, the furniture we'd picked out together, the art that had adorned our walls, the sentimental trinkets from our travels, all gone, spirited away in the dead of night, leaving behind only dust motes dancing in the sunlight and the gaping void of absence. Even our beloved pets, the two cats who had been my silent confidants through the darkest days of our marriage, were gone, taken by him in a final, calculated act of cruelty designed to inflict maximum pain. The only thing I had managed to cling to, the only tangible asset I had fought tooth and nail for, was this house. And even then, it came at a steep price. I had paid him his share, a significant sum that had depleted what little personal savings I had managed to squirrel away, just to buy him out and claim sole ownership. Or so I thought. Now, as the closing date loomed, his true colors, never truly hidden but always dismissed by my naive heart, shone with a blinding, malevolent intensity. His lawyer had delivered the message with a chillingly detached professionalism. Mark would not sign the necessary papers to remove his name from the deed unless I paid him more money. Not a small sum, not a token gesture, but a substantial, utterly unjustified ransom. It was a demand that defied logic, a blatant extortion attempt, a final, suffocating squeeze from the man who had already bled me dry. The audacity, the sheer, unadulterated narcissism of it, left me reeling. It wasn't about the money for him, not really. It was about control. It was about proving he could still reach into my life, still dictate my movements, still hold me captive in his toxic orbit. It was about ensuring I could never truly be free. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. My heart, already a fragile, mended thing, felt like it was fracturing all over again. I had spent the last 2 years navigating the labyrinthine horrors of divorce, fighting for scraps, enduring his psychological warfare, and trying desperately to rebuild a semblance of a life. Every step forward felt like 2 steps back, each small victory immediately countered by a fresh assault from him. This house, this final hurdle, felt insurmountable. The thought of having to pay him again, to feed his insatiable greed, to acknowledge his continued power over me, was unbearable. But what choice did I have? The buyer was waiting, my future was on hold, and the thought of being tethered to him indefinitely, through this house, was a fate worse than any financial loss. I felt trapped, utterly and completely, and a dangerous, unfamiliar fire began to flicker in the ashes of my despair. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was rage. And it was growing. The rage wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, simmering burn, a molten core forming deep within me. It had been building for years, fueled by 1,000 tiny slights, 100 grand betrayals, and finally, this ultimate act of financial and emotional terrorism. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing hollowly, each step a testament to the life he had systematically stripped away. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic beat of my own heart, a drumbeat of defiance against the despair. He had taken my money, my possessions, my pets, my peace of mind, And now he wanted to take my future, too. It was unconscionable. It was monstrous. The sheer audacity of his demand, delivered through his smirking lawyer, replayed in my mind like a broken record. Mr. Peterson requires an additional sum for his inconvenience in signing the deed. Inconvenience. His inconvenience was my liberation, my ability to finally close this agonizing chapter. My lawyer, a kind but weary woman who had seen it all, had advised me to just pay it. "It's less expensive than fighting him in court again, Sarah," she'd said, her voice laced with sympathy. "He knows you're exhausted. He's banking on it." And she was right. He was banking on it. He was banking on my exhaustion, my heartbreak, my desperate need for closure. He was banking on the fact that I was too broken to fight back. But something had shifted. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders, but beneath it, a new energy was stirring. It wasn't the energy of despair, but of a desperate, primal need for justice, for balance, for him to feel even a fraction of the pain he had inflicted. The thought of simply capitulating, of handing him more money, of letting him win again was suddenly intolerable. It felt like signing away not just my financial freedom, but my very soul. I had been a victim for too long, a pawn in his cruel game. The idea of being unhinged, of striking back in a way that defied the rules, began to take root in my mind, a dark, alluring seed. I sat on the cold floor in what used to be our bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was never truly mine, and pulled out my laptop. My fingers, usually hesitant and trembling, moved with a surprising resolve. I wasn't looking for legal advice anymore. I was looking for something else entirely. Something creative. Something untraceable. Something that would make his meticulously curated world unravel, just as he had unraveled mine. The internet, a vast ocean of human experience, offered whispers of revenge, tales of retribution, stories of people who had pushed back against their tormentors. Most of it was petty, some of it dangerous, but somewhere in that chaotic digital landscape, I hoped to find a spark. My mind raced, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger and a burgeoning sense of empowerment. What did he value most? His reputation, meticulously crafted and fiercely guarded. His control, absolute and unwavering. His comfort, his carefully constructed facade of success and superiority. To chip away at those, to expose the rotten core beneath the polished exterior, that would be true revenge. Not just financial, but psychological. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had always been the good one, the compliant one, the one who avoided conflict. But Mark had pushed me past all limits. He had pushed me to the brink, and now, standing on that precipice, I was starting to see a different path. A path where unhinged didn't mean crazy, but liberated. A path where I finally took back control, not by playing by his rules, but by rewriting them entirely. The question wasn't if I would act, but how star. The internet became my rabbit hole, a clandestine library of unconventional wisdom. I delved into forums, subreddits, and obscure blogs, sifting through countless suggestions, some wildly impractical, others disturbingly effective. My initial search terms were broad: revenge ideas, ex-husband, how to annoy a narcissist legally, untraceable pranks. The results were a mixed bag of the mundane and the truly bizarre. I dismissed anything that involved physical harm or direct confrontation. I wasn't looking for a criminal record, just a way to make his life a living hell without him ever being able to prove it was me. My goal was psychological warfare, a slow, insidious erosion of his carefully constructed reality. I found stories of people signing exes up for endless junk mail, enrolling them in bizarre niche newsletters, or setting up automated calls from telemarketers. These were amusing, perhaps, but too minor, too easily dismissed by someone like Mark. He thrived on chaos, on being the center of attention, even negative attention. He'd probably just block the numbers or toss the mail. I needed something more impactful, something that would hit him where it truly hurt: his ego, his reputation, and his sense of absolute control. Then I stumbled upon a thread discussing creative exposure. It wasn't about public shaming in the traditional sense, but about subtle, almost imperceptible ways to chip away at a person's carefully curated image. Someone had mentioned creating fake social media profiles for their ex, posting embarrassing but believable content. Another talked about leveraging online review sites. The ideas sparked a flicker of inspiration. Mark was obsessed with his public image, his professional reputation. He was a man who cultivated an aura of success, integrity, and charm. To tarnish that, even slightly, would be a devastating blow. My mind began to race, connecting dots. Mark was a real estate agent, ironically enough. He prided himself on his impeccable client relationships and his unblemished record. He had a professional website, a strong presence on LinkedIn, and a plethora of glowing and likely fabricated testimonials. This was fertile ground. What if I could subtly introduce doubt into that narrative? Not outright lies, but truths twisted just enough to be plausible, or inconvenient truths disguised as innocent observations. I started by meticulously researching his online footprint. It was extensive, as expected. He had profiles on every major real estate platform, a personal brand website, and an active social media presence where he curated an image of a devoted family man, despite having abandoned his actual family, and a shrewd, ethical businessman. I spent hours poring over his posts, his comments, his success stories. The more I dug, the more I saw the cracks in his facade. He was always subtly boasting, always subtly putting others down, always subtly positioning himself as the hero. It was nauseating. My first unhinged idea began to solidify. It was subtle, insidious, and perfectly aligned with his deepest insecurities. It involved reviews. Not just negative reviews, which he could easily dismiss as a disgruntled ex-wife, though I'd ensure they weren't directly traceable to me. No, something far more cunning. I envisioned a series of reviews that, on the surface, seemed positive, even glowing, but contained subtle, almost imperceptible red flags. Compliments that, upon closer inspection, could be interpreted as backhanded. Observations that highlighted his less desirable traits under the guise of praise. It was a slow poison, a drip of doubt that would fester in the minds of potential clients. The beauty of it was that he couldn't openly complain about positive reviews, even if they secretly undermined him. He'd be forced to accept them, to even thank the reviewer, all while the insidious seeds of suspicion were being sown. This was the kind of unhinged I could get behind. This was the kind of revenge that tasted sweet. The first review was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a carefully crafted verbal Trojan horse. I created a burner email address, a new online persona with a plausible-sounding name, and set about my task. I chose a lesser-known real estate review site, one he might not monitor as closely as the big ones, to test the waters. The review started innocently enough. Mark Peterson is truly a force of nature in the real estate world. His dedication is simply unparalleled. So far, so good. He'd probably preen at that. But then came the subtle twist. He works tirelessly, often late into the night, which is admirable, though sometimes his focus on the deal meant a few minor details, like timely communication on small updates, might slip through the cracks. But truly, his commitment to closing the deal is inspiring. The key was the juxtaposition. Unparalleled dedication immediately followed by minor details might slip through the cracks. Inspiring commitment to closing the deal hinting at a ruthless, perhaps even ethically flexible, approach. It was a compliment that simultaneously raised a question. A potential client reading it might think, "Oh, he's a workaholic, that's good." But a tiny voice in the back of their mind might also whisper, "What minor details? What kind of timely communication?" It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. And that was its power. He couldn't refute it without looking petty or defensive. He couldn't demand its removal because it was, technically, positive. I posted it late at night, a ghost in the machine, and then waited. The next morning, I checked the site. It was there. Unchallenged. Undetected. A small, insidious victory. This wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about the long game. It was about planting seeds of doubt that would grow over time, slowly eroding his carefully constructed image. My confidence grew with each passing day. I researched more obscure review platforms, local community forums, and even niche professional groups where real estate agents discussed their work. I created more personas, each with a slightly different tone, a different client experience. One review praised his unwavering confidence but subtly implied it sometimes bordered on arrogance, making clients feel unheard. Another lauded his negotiating prowess but hinted that his methods could be unconventional, leaving some parties feeling steamrolled. I even crafted one that gushed about his personal touch, but then added a line about how he sometimes brought his personal life into discussions, which was interesting. This was a subtle nod to his narcissism, his inability to separate his professional persona from his self-aggrandizing narratives. Each review was a tiny chip in his armor, a microscopic crack in the flawless facade he presented to the world. I ensured that none of them could be definitively linked to me. The language was always ambiguous enough to plausible deniability. I varied IP addresses using VPNs, cleared cookies, and used different devices. I was meticulous, almost obsessive, in my operational security. This wasn't just revenge, it was a strategic campaign. The house, once a prison, was slowly transforming into my command center. The emptiness that had once amplified my despair now offered a canvas for my newfound purpose. The silence was no longer deafening, it was the quiet hum of a mind at work, plotting, planning, executing. Each successful post, each subtle jab, brought a small, satisfying surge of power. It wasn't the cathartic explosion I sometimes craved, but a steady, simmering satisfaction. He had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take my mind, my ingenuity, or my growing resolve. And with each passing day, as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the fire within me burned brighter, fueled by the delicious anticipation of his inevitable, slow-burn unraveling. The review campaign was just the beginning, a subtle overture to a symphony of inconvenience and mild chaos I was orchestrating for Mark. As I continued to plant seeds of doubt online, my mind drifted to other, more tangible forms of disruption. What else could I do that would be untraceable, yet deeply irritating to someone like him? He valued order, control, and his carefully curated image of success. Anything that chipped away at that, even in minor ways, would be a victory. My thoughts turned to his professional life, specifically his open houses. He held them regularly, meticulously staging properties, ensuring every detail was perfect to impress potential buyers. He prided himself on the turnout, the buzz, the feeling of high demand he created. This was an opportunity. I started small. I found a local online forum for real estate agents and, under yet another anonymous persona, posted a seemingly innocent question. Anyone else notice a lot of no-shows at open houses lately? Or people just dropping in for the free snacks without any real interest? It was a general query, but I subtly steered the conversation towards the idea of people just showing up for the novelty, or to waste agents' time. The goal wasn't to directly target Mark, but to subtly normalize the idea of frivolous attendance, making it less suspicious when it happened at his events. Then came the execution. I found out the dates and times of his upcoming open houses through his public listings. I created a series of fake email addresses and phone numbers, using temporary services and burner apps. My plan was simple: flood his open houses with utterly unqualified, time-wasting leads. I signed up for multiple viewings, each under a different name, with slightly outlandish requests. Interested in a property with a helipad and a shark tank, one email might read. Another, looking for a home suitable for my collection of exotic birds. Soundproofing is a must. I even had one persona inquire about converting a residential property into a commercial space for a competitive dog grooming arena. The beauty of this was its untraceability. He couldn't prove it was me. These were just potential clients with unusual tastes. He would have to greet them, answer their absurd questions, and waste precious minutes of his time, all while genuine buyers might be waiting. The cumulative effect would be a slow drain on his patience and professionalism. Imagine the frustration of spending 15 minutes explaining why a suburban bungalow couldn't accommodate a professional-grade equestrian facility, only to realize the client was clearly not serious. I even took it a step further. I found a few local freebie groups on social media and, again, under an anonymous profile, posted about amazing free snacks and drinks at certain open houses, subtly hinting at Mark's listings without naming him directly. Heard the agent at General Area has a fantastic spread. It was enough to attract a few curious onlookers, people who were genuinely just there for the refreshments, adding to the general chaos and reducing the ratio of serious buyers. The thought of Mark, meticulously dressed and perfectly coiffed, forced to entertain a parade of time-wasters and snack hunters, filled me with a quiet satisfaction. He thrived on efficiency and projecting an image of being constantly busy with high-value clients. This would be a subtle, yet persistent, assault on his time and his carefully constructed professional facade. It was a small, almost invisible act of rebellion, but each one chipped away at the control he thought he still held over me and over his own life. The house, once a symbol of his lingering power, was becoming my fortress, a place where I could strategize and execute my quiet, unhinged revenge. My campaign of subtle sabotage extended beyond online reviews and open house disruptions. I began to think about the everyday annoyances, the small, persistent irritations that could chip away at Mark's carefully cultivated calm. He was a creature of habit, a man who believed himself above the petty frustrations of ordinary life. To introduce those frustrations, in a way he couldn't trace, became my new obsession. One evening, while idly scrolling through local community groups, I saw a post about a new initiative for recycling old electronics. A thought sparked. Mark was meticulous about his belongings, always upgrading, always ensuring he had the latest tech. He likely had a pile of old phones, laptops, and tablets gathering dust somewhere, waiting for convenient disposal. This was an opportunity. Using another burner email and a VPN, I signed him up for every single free trial and information packet I could find related to electronics recycling, data destruction services, and even bizarre tech-related newsletters. He would start receiving a deluge of unsolicited mail, glossy brochures, urgent-looking envelopes, and endless promotional materials for services he neither wanted nor needed. It wasn't harmful, just incredibly annoying. Imagine the daily ritual of sifting through a stack of junk mail, each piece a subtle reminder of an online interaction he didn't initiate. I also found a few obscure online directories for local businesses and, using the same untraceable methods, listed his personal cell phone number under various, slightly embarrassing, categories. Pet grooming services, mobile, specializes in anxious chihuahuas, amateur magician for children's parties, discount clown for hire. The descriptions were just vague enough to be plausible, yet ridiculous enough to cause him immense irritation. He would start receiving calls and texts from genuinely confused people inquiring about these services. He wouldn't be able to simply block them all, as his professional number was widely known. He'd have to deal with the awkward conversations, the explanations, the slow realization that someone, somewhere, was messing with him. The beauty of these tactics lay in their banality. They weren't grand gestures of revenge. They were 1,000 tiny cuts. Each unsolicited call, each piece of junk mail, each confused inquiry about a clown for hire would be a minor disruption to his day, a small erosion of his control. He prided himself on his efficiency, his ability to manage his time and his life with ruthless precision. These small acts of chaos would chip away at that precision, forcing him to waste moments, to feel a flicker of the powerlessness he had inflicted upon me. I imagined him, impeccably dressed, answering his phone with his practiced professional voice, only to be met with an inquiry about a mobile dog grooming service. The fleeting moment of confusion, then irritation, then the dawning suspicion that something was amiss. He wouldn't know who was doing it, or why, and that uncertainty would be its own form of torment. He thrived on knowing everything, on being in control of every narrative. This would be a narrative he couldn't control, a series of random, inexplicable annoyances that would slowly drive him mad. The house, still empty save for my presence, felt less like a tomb and more like a laboratory. Each new idea, each successful execution, brought a perverse sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about getting my money back from him directly, not anymore. It was about reclaiming my agency, about turning the tables, about showing him that even though he thought he had one, I was still here, still fighting, still capable of making his life just a little bit more miserable. And the closer we got to the closing date, the more determined I became to leave him with a lasting, untraceable legacy of chaos. My focus shifted to Mark's social life, another carefully constructed facade he maintained with ruthless precision. He prided himself on his wide circle of friends and associates, a network he leveraged for both professional gain and personal validation. To disrupt this, even subtly, would be a deeply satisfying blow. I knew his routine. Mark was a regular at a couple of upscale bars and restaurants in his new neighborhood, places where he could be seen, where he could network, where he could hold court. He loved being recognized, loved the deference he received from staff and the admiration from his peers. This was fertile ground for my next series of unhinged maneuvers. Using yet another untraceable burner phone and email, I started signing him up for various exclusive mailing lists and VIP memberships at these very establishments. Not just for their regular newsletters, but for things like early bird specials for senior citizens, singles night mixers for divorcees, or discounted happy hour for local community volunteers. The goal wasn't to embarrass him directly, but to subtly associate him with demographics or events that would clash with his carefully cultivated image of a sophisticated, eternally youthful, and highly successful bachelor. Imagine him receiving an email invitation to a Golden Years discount night at his favorite martini bar. It wouldn't be a public shaming, just a quiet, internal cringe. I also found a way to subtly mess with his reservations. Mark always booked tables under his own name, often requesting specific, prominent tables. I started using online reservation systems, making multiple, overlapping bookings for him under slightly altered versions of his name, or under names that were just one letter off from his, at the same restaurants he frequented. Mark Peterson, Mark Peterson, Mr. Peterson. The goal was to create confusion for the hostesses, to subtly imply he was either forgetful, disorganized, or perhaps even trying to game the system. He might arrive for his meticulously planned dinner, only to find 2 other reservations under similar names, causing a momentary delay, a flicker of irritation, and a subtle questioning glance from the staff. It was a minor inconvenience, but one that would chip away at his sense of effortless superiority. Another tactic involved local charity events and silent auctions. Mark loved to attend these, not out of genuine altruism, but for the networking opportunities and the chance to publicly display his generosity. I found several upcoming events he was likely to attend and, again, using untraceable methods, registered him for the most obscure, least appealing volunteer roles. Greeter for early morning setup, trash collection duty for late-night cleanup, parking lot attendant in the rain. He wouldn't be forced to do them, of course, but he would receive the automated email confirmations, the follow-up calls, the gentle nudges about his commitment. It would be a constant, low-level hum of obligation and expectation, reminding him of commitments he never made, forcing him to politely decline or simply ignore them, all while subtly undermining his image as a willing, generous participant. These were not acts of grand revenge, but rather a series of carefully placed pebbles in his perfectly smooth shoes. Each one a tiny irritation, a subtle disruption to his carefully managed life. The beauty was their untraceability. He wouldn't know who was behind it, or why. He would just experience a slow, creeping sense of things being slightly off, of his world becoming just a little less predictable, a little less perfect. And as the closing date for the house loomed closer, the satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a quiet, defiant hum in the empty rooms. The deeper I delved into the art of untraceable disruption, the more I realized the power of information, specifically, misinformation, or rather, misplaced information. Mark was a creature of habit, and his digital life was as meticulously organized as his physical one. He used certain email addresses for certain purposes, specific phone numbers for specific contacts. To scramble that, even slightly, would be a delightful form of chaos. My next target was his professional contacts. He had a vast network of colleagues, clients, and industry associates, all carefully cultivated. I knew he used a specific professional email address for most of these interactions. My plan was to subtly redirect or misdirect some of his less critical, but still important, communications. I started by finding several online forums and professional groups where real estate agents exchanged tips, advertised services, or discussed industry news. Under a new, innocuous persona, I began to participate in these groups, subtly dropping Mark's professional email address into conversations where it didn't quite belong. For instance, if someone asked for a recommendation for a good local plumber, I might accidentally type Mark's email instead of a plumber's, quickly correcting myself in a follow-up post, but leaving the initial incorrect email out there for anyone quickly skimming the thread. Or, I might mistakenly use his professional email when inquiring about a niche, unrelated service, like local taxidermy services or antique doll repair. The goal wasn't to send him spam, but to send him *relevant emails from *legitimate sources that were utterly irrelevant to his profession. He would start receiving newsletters for taxidermy enthusiasts, promotional offers for doll repair kits, or inquiries about obscure hobbies he had no interest in. Each one would be a legitimate email, sent to his correct address, but completely out of context. It would be a constant, low-level hum of confusion, forcing him to spend time sifting through his inbox, trying to understand why he was suddenly receiving updates on competitive birdwatching or artisanal cheese-making. I also targeted his professional subscriptions. Many industry publications and real estate news sites offer free trials or introductory offers. I signed him up for dozens of these, using various burner emails and VPNs, ensuring that the physical copies would be sent to his office address and the digital ones to his professional email. He would be inundated with unsolicited magazines, journals, and daily newsletters, all ostensibly relevant to his field, but far more than he could ever possibly read or process. The sheer volume would be overwhelming, a constant reminder of an information overload he never asked for. The beauty of this was that he couldn't simply unsubscribe from everything without risking missing something important. He'd have to meticulously go through each one, decide if it was legitimate, and then unsubscribe, a tedious and time-consuming process. It was a slow, deliberate assault on his time and mental bandwidth. I imagined him, sitting at his pristine desk, surrounded by stacks of unsolicited real estate journals, his inbox overflowing with bizarre inquiries and irrelevant newsletters. The frustration would be palpable. He prided himself on his efficiency, his ability to manage his time and his information flow. This was a direct attack on that sense of control. He wouldn't know who was doing it, or why, but he would feel the subtle, creeping sense of his carefully ordered world descending into mild, inexplicable chaos. And with each passing day, as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My campaign of subtle digital disruption was proving effective, a slow erosion of Mark's professional composure. But I craved something more visceral, something that would hit him closer to home, yet remain utterly untraceable. My thoughts turned to his new residence. After the divorce, he had moved into a sleek, modern condo downtown, a place he often boasted about, a symbol of his unfettered new life. This was an opportunity to bring the chaos directly to his doorstep, without ever physically being there. I started by researching his building. Most modern condos have online portals for residents, communal message boards, or even dedicated social media groups. With a bit of clever searching and a new anonymous persona, I managed to gain access to one such community board, posing as a new, overly enthusiastic resident. The goal wasn't to post anything directly malicious, but to sow seeds of subtle discord and inconvenience. My first move was to post a series of helpful but ultimately disruptive suggestions. Has anyone considered a building-wide no shoes inside policy for common areas to reduce cleaning costs? I'd ask innocently. Or, I've noticed some residents leaving their recycling bins out a day early. Perhaps we could implement a strict penalty system to ensure compliance. These weren't direct attacks on Mark, but they were the kind of overly zealous, slightly annoying suggestions that would spark debates, create tension, and generally make the communal living experience just a little less harmonious. Mark, who valued peace and quiet and a sense of effortless superiority, would find these petty squabbles deeply irritating. Then came the more targeted, yet still untraceable, disruptions. I knew he had a designated parking spot. Using the community board, I posted a general query: just moved in, still figuring out parking. Are there any common issues with people parking in the wrong spots, especially on weekends? This was followed by a subtle, anonymous tip to a local towing company about frequent unauthorized parking in the specific visitor spots near Mark's building. The goal wasn't to get his car towed, but to introduce the possibility of it, to make him constantly aware of the rules, to make him slightly paranoid about his own parking habits, or to cause minor inconveniences for his guests. I also found a local online service that allowed anonymous good neighbor complaints to be submitted to building management. I didn't use it for anything serious, but for minor, easily dismissed infractions. Loud talking on the balcony late at night, unidentified pet barking, leaving trash bags outside the door for too long. These were generic complaints, impossible to trace to Mark directly, but if management started receiving a pattern of them, even minor ones, it would lead to building-wide notices, increased scrutiny, and a general tightening of rules. Mark, who believed himself above such petty regulations, would find this incredibly frustrating. He'd feel the subtle pressure of increased surveillance, the erosion of his privacy, without ever knowing why. The beauty of these tactics was their cumulative effect. Each small annoyance, each subtle disruption, would contribute to a growing sense of unease in his new, perfect life. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of things being slightly off, of his carefully constructed world becoming just a little less comfortable, a little less controlled. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was evolving, becoming more intricate, more insidious. The digital and communal disruptions were satisfying, but I wanted to touch on something even more personal, something that would subtly undermine his sense of self-importance and his carefully cultivated image of effortless success. Mark was incredibly vain. His appearance, his possessions, and his perceived status were paramount. I started targeting his online shopping habits. I knew he was a frequent user of several high-end online retailers, always buying the latest gadgets, designer clothes, and luxury items. Using a new set of untraceable burner accounts and VPNs, I began to sign him up for various exclusive mailing lists that were just slightly off-brand for his image. Think discounted senior fashion, budget-friendly travel packages for the frugal, or beginner's guide to couponing. These wouldn't be spam. They would be legitimate emails from legitimate companies, but they would be utterly incongruous with his self-perception. Imagine him opening his inbox to find an email titled, "Unlock Your Savings. Senior discounts on everyday essentials." It would be a tiny, almost imperceptible jab at his ego, a subtle suggestion that he wasn't as young, as wealthy, or as effortlessly chic as he believed himself to be. Then I moved to his physical mail. I researched companies that offered free samples of bizarre or niche products, things that he would never in a million years order for himself. Think free sample of industrial-strength drain cleaner, complimentary brochures for assisted living facilities, or trial pack of extra-absorbent adult diapers. I signed him up for dozens of these, ensuring they were sent to his condo address. He would start receiving a trickle of these strange, unsolicited packages and envelopes, each one a baffling mystery. He wouldn't know why he was getting them, who sent them, or if someone was deliberately targeting him. The sheer randomness and incongruity of the items would be unsettling, a constant, low-level hum of what the hell. I also found a few online services that allowed you to send anonymous, pre-written postcards or greeting cards. I used these to send him a series of cryptic, slightly unsettling messages. Not threatening, but just odd. Thinking of you, hope you're well. Remember that time with the pigeons? Or, just saw a man who looked exactly like you. Strange. Or, the past is never truly gone, is it? Each postcard would be different, with no return address, no identifying marks. They would be just enough to make him wonder, to plant a seed of paranoia, to make him question who might be watching, who might know something. He prided himself on his control, on his ability to manipulate narratives. These anonymous messages would be a narrative he couldn't control, a ghost in his perfectly ordered life. The beauty of these tactics was their cumulative effect. Each strange email, each bizarre package, each cryptic postcard would contribute to a growing sense of unease, a feeling that his meticulously constructed world was slowly, subtly, unraveling. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of things being slightly off, of his carefully constructed reality becoming just a little less predictable, a little less perfect. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was gaining momentum, each successful act fueling my resolve. The digital and physical annoyances were satisfying, but I wanted to strike at something more fundamental: his time. Mark was obsessed with efficiency, with maximizing every minute. To waste his time, subtly and untraceably, would be a delicious form of revenge. I knew he relied heavily on online scheduling tools for his professional appointments and personal commitments. This presented a perfect opportunity. Using a new array of burner emails and VPNs, I began to book him for a series of utterly useless, yet plausible, appointments. I started with consultations for services he would never need. Free estimate for roof repair on a multi-story commercial building. Introductory meeting for a high-net-worth investment portfolio, minimum $10 million. Consultation for a bespoke yacht charter. Each booking was made with a plausible-sounding name and a burner phone number, ensuring that the confirmation emails and calendar invites would go directly to his professional inbox. He would see these appointments pop up on his schedule, forcing him to either ignore them and risk missing a legitimate lead, or spend time cancelling them, often requiring a phone call or an email exchange. The sheer volume would be overwhelming, a constant stream of low-value, time-consuming obligations. Then I moved to more personal time wasters. I signed him up for various free informational seminars and webinars that were completely irrelevant to his interests. Understanding the intricacies of competitive birdwatching, the art of artisanal cheese making, a beginner's guide, advanced techniques in miniature dollhouse construction. These were legitimate events, but utterly useless to him. He would receive reminders, links, and follow-up emails, forcing him to either delete them or, worse, accidentally click on them and waste a few minutes of his precious time. I also targeted his personal services. I knew he used a specific dry cleaner, a particular car wash, and a certain upscale barber. Using anonymous online forms or burner phones, I would occasionally accidentally book him for a service he didn't need, or cancel a service he did. Could you please cancel Mark Peterson's dry cleaning pickup for Tuesday? He'll be out of town. Or, I'd like to book Mark Peterson for a full car detailing, interior and exterior, for tomorrow morning. These minor disruptions would force him to make phone calls, clarify misunderstandings, and generally waste his time dealing with the fallout of phantom appointments. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability. He couldn't prove it was me. These were just mistakes, misunderstandings, or unsolicited offers. He would just experience a slow, creeping sense of his schedule being subtly hijacked, of his time being eroded by inexplicable demands. He prided himself on his efficiency, his ability to manage his time with ruthless precision. This was a direct attack on that control, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly ordered as he believed. I imagined him, staring at his calendar, seeing a booking for a yacht charter consultation sandwiched between two legitimate client meetings. The flicker of confusion, then irritation, then the slow burn of realization that someone, somewhere, was deliberately wasting his time. He wouldn't know who, or why, and that uncertainty would be its own form of torment. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My campaign of subtle chaos was becoming an art form, each stroke designed to chip away at Mark's carefully constructed reality. The digital and time-based disruptions were effective, but I wanted to make him feel a more pervasive sense of unease, a feeling that his personal space, his very sanctuary, was subtly compromised. He was a meticulous individual, almost obsessively neat, and took immense pride in his possessions. I began to focus on his physical environment, specifically his condo. While I couldn't physically enter it, I could manipulate the world around it, creating a subtle, untraceable sense of disarray. I started by researching local delivery services, food, groceries, packages. Using a new set of burner accounts and VPNs, I began to order small, innocuous items for delivery to his address, but with specific, slightly inconvenient instructions. For instance, I'd order a single, inexpensive item from a grocery store, a bag of apples, a loaf of bread, but add a note: please leave package leaning against the main entrance door, not at the concierge. Or, delivery between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. only, please knock loudly. These weren't large, expensive orders, just enough to cause a minor disturbance. He would wake up to a knock in the middle of the night, or find a random grocery bag leaning against his door, forcing him to deal with it, to wonder why it was there, and to feel a subtle violation of his personal space. I also found a few online services that offered anonymous gift deliveries. Things like a single, random balloon, a small potted plant, or a box of generic chocolates with no sender information. I sent him a few of these, each with a different, slightly baffling note. From a secret admirer, or just because, or hope this brightens your day, you deserve it. The gifts themselves were harmless, even pleasant, but the anonymity and the sheer randomness of them would be unsettling. He would be left wondering who sent them, what their motive was, and if he had some unknown admirer or, worse, a stalker. The ambiguity would be maddening for someone who craved control and understanding. My most satisfying tactic involved his mail. I knew he received a lot of important documents and correspondence at his condo. I found a few online services that allowed you to send anonymous change of address forms to various non-critical organizations. Things like magazine subscriptions, loyalty programs, or even obscure alumni associations. I would subtly redirect some of his less important mail to a P.O. box I had set up under a fake name, or even to a random, abandoned address. He wouldn't miss crucial bills or legal documents, but he would notice that certain magazines stopped arriving, or that he wasn't receiving updates from a particular club. It would create a subtle, nagging sense of things being lost, of his information flow being subtly disrupted, without any clear explanation. The beauty of these tactics was their cumulative effect. Each strange delivery, each anonymous gift, each missing piece of mail would contribute to a growing sense of unease, a feeling that his meticulously constructed world was slowly, subtly, unraveling. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of things being slightly off, of his carefully constructed reality becoming just a little less predictable, a little less perfect. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was escalating, each successful act emboldening me further. The digital, time-based, and physical space disruptions were satisfying, but I wanted to strike at something deeper, something that would undermine his very sense of self-worth and his carefully cultivated image of being universally admired. Mark thrived on validation, on being seen as the best, the most successful, the most charming. I decided to target his social media presence, not with direct attacks, but with subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that would sow seeds of doubt among his followers and, more importantly, within his own mind. He meticulously curated his profiles, posting only flattering photos and self-aggrandizing updates. Using a new set of untraceable burner accounts, I began to interact with his posts in a way that was subtly off-kilter. For instance, if he posted a photo of himself at a charity event, I'd comment, "So glad to see you finally making an effort to give back, Mark. It's never too late to start." The comment was technically positive, but the implication that he hadn't made an effort before, or that he was a latecomer to philanthropy, would subtly undermine his carefully crafted image of lifelong generosity. If he posted about a professional achievement, I'd comment, "Amazing work, Mark. Just goes to show what you can achieve when you really put your mind to it, even after a few false starts." Again, a compliment, but with a subtle, vague reference to false starts that would make his followers wonder, and make him inwardly seethe. He couldn't delete these comments without looking petty, and he couldn't respond without drawing attention to the subtle digs. I also started following some of his professional contacts and personal friends, not to interact with them, but to observe. I noticed patterns in their engagement with his posts. Then, using my anonymous accounts, I would subtly like or react to their comments on his posts in a way that amplified any underlying skepticism or faint praise. If someone left a lukewarm comment like, "Good job, Mark," I'd heart it, making it stand out more, subtly highlighting the lack of effusive praise. My most insidious tactic involved creating fake fan accounts that were just a little *2 enthusiastic, a little *2 fawning. These accounts would leave comments like, "Mark Peterson, you are truly a god among men. Your brilliance shines brighter than the sun." Or, "Is there anything Mark can't do? So inspiring." The language would be over the top, almost satirical, making his genuine followers subtly question the authenticity of his online adoration. It would make his legitimate compliments seem less sincere, as if he were paying for his own praise. He wouldn't be able to delete these without looking ungrateful, and he couldn't acknowledge them without looking ridiculous. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his online narrative being subtly hijacked, of his carefully constructed image being subtly undermined. He prided himself on his public perception, on being universally admired. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was now a full-blown psychological operation, meticulously designed to chip away at Mark's composure from every conceivable angle. The digital, time-based, physical space, and social media disruptions were yielding a satisfying, slow burn. But I wanted to hit him where his ego was most vulnerable, his perceived intellectual superiority and his disdain for anything he deemed beneath him. I knew Mark considered himself highly intelligent, well-read, and culturally refined. He often made condescending remarks about popular culture or anything he deemed unsophisticated. This was an open invitation for my next series of untraceable annoyances. I began by signing him up for a plethora of niche, highly specific, and utterly irrelevant online newsletters and physical magazines. Not just generic spam, but publications that would actively irritate his sensibilities. Think The Enthusiast's Guide to Competitive Eating, Advanced Techniques in Professional Wrestling Fan Fiction, The History of Clown College, an academic journal. These were legitimate publications, but their content would be anathema to his self-proclaimed intellectual tastes. He would receive daily or weekly updates, forcing him to either delete them or, worse, accidentally open one and be confronted with content he found utterly repulsive or intellectually insulting. Then I moved to online forums and communities. Using new burner accounts, I would subtly tag or mention him, using his public social media handle or professional email, if available, in discussions related to these lowbrow topics. For instance, if there was a heated debate about the best fast food burger, I'd comment, "Mark Peterson would probably have a strong opinion on this, he's quite the connoisseur." Or, for expert advice on professional wrestling, I always turned to Mark Peterson's insights. The goal wasn't to directly involve him, but to associate his name, however fleetingly, with topics he despised. He might see these mentions, or friends of his might, and it would create a subtle dissonance with his carefully curated image. My most satisfying tactic involved online quizzes and personality tests. Mark loved to project an image of being a shrewd, analytical thinker. I found numerous free, online personality tests that were designed to reveal quirky, embarrassing, or even slightly unflattering traits. Things like, which obscure cartoon character are you? Or what kind of houseplant best represents your inner spirit? I would fill these out, answering questions in a way that would generate a result that was subtly incongruous with his self-image, perhaps a slightly wilting fern, or the perpetually confused sidekick. Then, using the share results function, I would send the link, anonymously, to his professional email or even to a few of his close associates, with a note like, "Thought you might find this interesting, it really captures a certain essence." The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their profound psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his intellectual and cultural narrative being subtly hijacked, of his carefully constructed image being subtly undermined. He prided himself on his intelligence and his refined tastes. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was now a relentless, multi-pronged assault on Mark's carefully constructed reality. Each successful act, each subtle disruption, fueled my determination. The digital, time-based, physical space, social media, and intellectual attacks were yielding a satisfying, slow burn. But I wanted to hit him where his deepest insecurities lay, his finances, not by taking his money, but by making him question his own shrewdness and control over his wealth. Mark was notoriously obsessed with money, not just having it, but being perceived as financially astute and always getting the best deal. This was a prime target for my next series of untraceable annoyances. I started by signing him up for an endless stream of unsolicited financial advice, investment opportunities, and credit card offers. Not just generic spam, but targeted pitches for things like subprime mortgage refinancing, high-interest payday loans, or debt consolidation services for those struggling to make ends meet. These were legitimate offers, but their very nature would be deeply insulting to someone who prided himself on his financial stability and acumen. He would receive daily emails and physical mail, forcing him to confront the implication that he might be in financial distress or that he was a target for desperate measures. Then I moved to online financial forums and investment groups. Using new burner accounts, I would subtly tag or mention him, using his public social media handle or professional email, if available, in discussions related to financial blunders or questionable investments. For instance, if someone was discussing a failed stock venture, I'd comment, "Mark Peterson always said to avoid that one, he's so good at spotting a bad deal, usually." The usually was the key, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in his facade of infallibility. Or, I might mistakenly post his email when asking for advice on how to recover from a particularly risky investment. My most insidious tactic involved online classifieds and marketplaces. Mark was always discreet about his high-value purchases, never wanting to appear ostentatious. I began to subtly list his items for sale at ridiculously low prices on various local online marketplaces. Not his actual items, of course, but descriptions of things I knew he owned, a specific model of luxury watch, a high-end golf club set, a designer suit. The listings would be vague enough to be plausible, but the prices would be absurdly low, implying a desperate need for cash. Rolex Submariner, barely worn, quick sale needed, $500. Full set of tailor-made clubs, moving sale, $150. The goal wasn't for anyone to actually buy these phantom items, but for him to potentially stumble upon the listings himself, or for a friend to see them and jokingly ask, "Hey, are you really selling your Rolex for $500? The sheer public implication of financial desperation, even if entirely fabricated, would be a deeply humiliating blow to his ego. He wouldn't be able to prove it wasn't him, and the very act of trying to explain away such listings would be a nightmare. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their profound psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his financial narrative being subtly hijacked, of his carefully constructed image of wealth and shrewdness being subtly undermined. He prided himself on his financial prowess. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was now a symphony of subtle torment, each note designed to resonate with Mark's deepest insecurities. The digital, time-based, physical space, social media, intellectual and financial disruptions were proving incredibly satisfying. But I wanted to hit him at his core, at his very sense of self-importance and his insatiable need for admiration. He craved being seen as a pillar of the community, a respected figure. I began to target his perceived standing in local society. Mark was always keen to be involved in local events, charity drives, and community initiatives, not out of genuine civic duty, but for the photo opportunities and the chance to network and be seen as a benevolent force. This was a prime target for my next series of untraceable annoyances. I started by signing him up for a multitude of local volunteer opportunities that were far beneath his perceived status, or incredibly time-consuming and thankless. Think roadside litter pickup, public park restroom cleaning duty, or early morning dog park waste disposal. These were legitimate volunteer roles, but the kind he would never deign to do. He would receive automated emails and phone calls, confirming his commitment and reminding him of upcoming shifts. He would have to politely decline, or simply ignore them, but the constant stream of these low-status requests would be a subtle affront to his ego. Then I moved to local news and community forums. Using new burner accounts, I would subtly tag or mention him, using his public social media handle or professional email, if available, in discussions related to local controversies or petty squabbles. For instance, if there was a heated debate about a new traffic light, I'd comment, "Perhaps Mark Peterson, with his vast experience, could weigh in on this highly complex issue." The sarcasm would be subtle, almost imperceptible, but it would associate his name with trivial, frustrating local issues he would want no part of. Or, I might mistakenly post his email when asking for opinions on a particularly unsightly public art installation. My most insidious tactic involved local Citizen of the Month or Community Hero nominations. Mark would often angle for these, or subtly hint at his own worthiness. I found several online forms for nominating individuals for these awards and, using untraceable methods, nominated him for categories that were subtly demeaning or backhanded. Nomination for Most Improved Neighbor, from a very low baseline, or nomination for community member who tries hardest to be seen, or nomination for best effort at appearing humble. Each nomination would be crafted with just enough ambiguity to be plausible, but with an underlying current of passive aggression. He might even receive a notification that he had been nominated, forcing him to consider the true meaning behind the honor. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their profound psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his community standing being subtly hijacked, of his carefully constructed image of respect and admiration being subtly undermined. He prided himself on his social standing and his influence. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was now a finely tuned instrument of psychological warfare, each action designed to resonate with Mark's deepest vulnerabilities. The digital, time-based, physical space, social media, intellectual, financial, and community disruptions were all contributing to a growing sense of unease in his life. But I wanted to hit him at an even more primal level, his sense of security and his carefully constructed illusion of privacy. Mark was a man who believed he was untouchable, that his life was impenetrable. To introduce a subtle, constant feeling of being watched, of his boundaries being blurred, would be a truly exquisite form of torment. I began by leveraging public records and readily available online information to create a series of public interest inquiries related to his properties. Not anything illegal or harmful, but just enough to trigger official-looking notifications. For instance, I'd submit anonymous inquiries to the city planning department about potential zoning changes near his condo, or ask about the possibility of a new public park being developed on an adjacent lot. He would receive official letters or emails from city departments, informing him of these inquiries and inviting him to public hearings he knew nothing about. It would create a subtle, nagging sense of external scrutiny on his property, making him feel less secure in his ownership. Then I moved to his online data footprint. While I couldn't access his private accounts, I could manipulate the public perception of his data. I found several websites that offered data removal services, promising to scrub personal information from the internet. Using new burner accounts, I would sign Mark up for free consultations with these services, or even initiate the process for him, providing only publicly available information. He would start receiving emails and calls from these companies, asking him to confirm his identity and detailing the sensitive information they had found about him online. It would make him question how much of his life was truly private, and subtly imply that his data was more exposed than he thought. My most insidious tactic involved his phone number. I found several online services that allowed you to send anonymous text messages from a rotating list of numbers. I would send him extremely short, cryptic messages at odd hours. Not threatening, but just enough to be unsettling. Saw you today. Interesting choice. Remember this. Or even just a single, random emoji. The messages would come from different, untraceable numbers, making it impossible for him to block them all. He wouldn't know who was sending them or why, and the sheer randomness and persistence of them would chip away at his sense of security. He would constantly be checking his phone, wondering if the next message was coming, if someone was indeed watching him. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their profound psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his privacy being subtly invaded, of his carefully constructed world becoming just a little less secure, a little less predictable. He prided himself on his control and his impenetrable facade. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these small acts of rebellion grew, a defiant hum in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. My unhinged campaign was nearing its crescendo, a relentless assault on every facet of Mark's carefully constructed life. The digital, time-based, physical space, social media, intellectual, financial, community, and security disruptions had undoubtedly taken their toll. But I wanted one final, truly unhinged touch that would expose his true nature, not just to me, but to a wider, unsuspecting audience, without him ever knowing I was the architect. Mark, being a narcissist, loved to talk about himself. He loved to tell stories, to spin narratives where he was always the hero, always the victim, always the smartest in the room. He was particularly fond of recounting his struggles during the divorce, painting himself as the wronged party, the one who had to fight for what was rightfully his. This was the perfect avenue for my final, most elaborate act of exposure. I decided to create an anonymous online persona, a concerned citizen or observer who was simply documenting local life. This persona would subtly, almost imperceptibly, start posting on local community forums, neighborhood watch groups, and even local news comment sections. The posts wouldn't be about Mark directly, but about observing patterns of behavior in the community. My most potent tool would be his own words. I had years of emails, text messages, and even recorded phone calls, taken legally during the divorce proceedings, for my own protection, where Mark had revealed his true, manipulative, and often cruel nature. I would never post these directly, of course. Instead, I would paraphrase them, subtly, into general observations about human behavior. For instance, if Mark had once boasted about taking something from me just because he could, I would post, "It's interesting how some people in our community seem to believe that taking things from others, even when it causes immense distress, is simply a matter of what they can get away with." A true lack of empathy, wouldn't you agree? The language would be general, but the sentiment would be unmistakably his. If he had once gloated about financially crippling me, I would post, "I've noticed a pattern where some individuals seem to derive pleasure from financially draining others, especially those who are vulnerable. It's a disturbing form of control, isn't it?" The beauty of this was that it wasn't an accusation. It was an observation, a philosophical musing on human nature, but drawn directly from the wellspring of his own depravity. Anyone who knew Mark, who had even a passing familiarity with his character, would read these observations and a tiny bell would ring in their minds. They wouldn't be able to pinpoint why, but a subtle association would form, "That sounds just like Mark." I would also subtly highlight his hypocrisy. If he posted on social media about supporting a local charity, I would follow up with an anonymous post on a community forum, musing about how some people publicly champion causes while privately engaging in behaviors that contradict their public image. A fascinating study in human duality. This was the ultimate unhinged move, using his own words, his own actions, to paint a picture of his true self without ever mentioning his name. It was a slow, insidious exposure, a quiet whisper that would spread through his circles, making people subtly question his integrity, his sincerity, his very character. He wouldn't be able to fight it, because it wasn't a direct attack. It was simply a reflection of the darkness he himself had projected. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these acts of profound, untraceable exposure grew into a powerful, defiant roar in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. The closing date for the house loomed, a tangible marker of my impending liberation, and the intensity of my unhinged campaign reached its peak. Each day brought a new opportunity to subtly undermine Mark's world, to chip away at his carefully constructed facade. The public exposure tactics, using his own words against him, were proving particularly potent, sowing seeds of doubt among his acquaintances without ever directly naming him. Now, I turned my attention to his professional reputation in a more direct, yet still untraceable, manner. Mark prided himself on his ethical dealings and client satisfaction. I knew he had a few long-standing clients, people who had been with him for years, who trusted him implicitly. These were the perfect targets for a subtle, untraceable whisper campaign. I found several online forums and groups where people discussed real estate agents, seeking recommendations or sharing experiences. Under various anonymous personas, I would subtly insert questions or observations that would make his loyal clients, or potential new ones, pause and think. For example, if someone asked for a reliable agent, I might respond, "Mark Peterson is certainly very effective at closing deals, but I've heard some mixed reviews about his communication after the sale. Just something to consider." This wasn't an outright accusation, merely a heard rumor, impossible to trace or refute. It would plant a tiny seed of doubt in the minds of those who trusted him most. Another tactic involved creating fake testimonials for him on obscure, less monitored review sites. These testimonials would be overwhelmingly positive, but with a single, subtly off-putting phrase. "Mark Peterson worked tirelessly to sell our home. He was so dedicated, we barely saw him sleep," which was a little concerning for his health, but admirable. Or, "Mark is a true shark in negotiations, he gets the job done. Just be prepared for his unique methods." The compliments were there, but the underlying message was one of slight discomfort or unease. He couldn't complain about positive reviews, but they would subtly paint him as someone who might be a bit too intense, a bit too unconventional, or even slightly unhinged himself. I also leveraged his existing online presence. I knew he had many professional connections on LinkedIn. Using anonymous accounts, I would subtly endorse him for skills that were either vaguely negative or completely irrelevant to his profession. Endorse Mark Peterson for Master of Delegation, even when it's inappropriate, or endorse Mark Peterson for Expert in Self-Promotion, or endorse Mark Peterson for Unwavering Confidence, even when wrong. These endorsements would appear on his profile, visible to his network, and while seemingly innocuous, they would subtly undermine his true professional image. He couldn't remove them without looking petty, and they would serve as a constant, low-level irritation. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their insidious nature. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his professional reputation being subtly eroded, of his carefully constructed image of competence and trustworthiness being undermined. He prided himself on his professional standing. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house drew nearer, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these acts of profound, untraceable exposure grew into a powerful, defiant roar in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. The final days leading up to the house closing were a blur of nervous anticipation and a surge of last-minute unhinged creativity. My campaign had been relentless, a constant, untraceable drip of chaos into Mark's meticulously ordered life. Now, I focused on a grand finale, something that would be deeply personal, yet still impossible to trace back to me. It involved his relationships, particularly any new ones he might be cultivating. Mark, being a narcissist, moved quickly from one relationship to the next, always seeking new sources of admiration and validation. He would often parade new partners around, eager to show off his new life. This was a vulnerable spot, a place where a subtle, untraceable seed of doubt could cause significant disruption. I started by researching dating apps and social media platforms he was likely to use. Under a new, anonymous female persona, I would subtly interact with his public profiles or posts. Not directly, but in a way that would make any new partner question his past. For instance, if he posted a photo of himself looking happy, I might comment, "So glad to see you found happiness, Mark. It's been a long road since, you know." The vagueness was key, implying a shared, difficult past that his new partner would know nothing about, sparking curiosity and suspicion. Another tactic involved anonymous advice messages. I found a few online forums where people discussed dating and relationships. Under a new persona, I would post a general question: how do you deal with a partner who constantly talks about their nightmare ex, always painting themselves as the victim, even when they were the cause of the problems? I would then subtly weave in details that mirrored Mark's specific divorce narrative, making it clear to anyone who knew him or his new partner, if they stumbled upon it, that it was about him. The advice given by other forum members would then be a subtle, untraceable warning to his new partner about his manipulative tendencies. My most potent move involved sending anonymous care packages to his new partners, if I could ascertain their addresses, which was often surprisingly easy through public social media. These packages wouldn't contain anything harmful or threatening. Instead, they would contain items that subtly alluded to his past or to his less desirable traits. Perhaps a book on how to spot a narcissist, or a CD of particularly melancholic breakup songs, or even a small, generic gift with a note like, "Hope this helps you through the next chapter." The gifts would be innocuous, but the anonymity and the subtle message would be deeply unsettling, making his new partner question who was sending them and why. The beauty of these tactics was their untraceability and their profound psychological impact. He wouldn't be able to pinpoint the source, or even identify a specific enemy. He would just feel a slow, creeping sense of his personal life being subtly infiltrated, of his carefully constructed relationships being undermined by unseen forces. He prided himself on his charm and his ability to win people over. This was a direct attack on that, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. And as the closing date for the house finally arrived, the quiet satisfaction I felt from these acts of profound, untraceable exposure grew into a powerful, defiant roar in the empty rooms that had once held so much pain. The house was no longer a prison, it was a launchpad. The day of the closing arrived, a crisp, cool morning that felt like a new beginning. I dressed carefully, opting for a simple, professional outfit that belied the storm of emotions brewing within me. The house was empty now, truly empty. My few remaining belongings were packed, ready to be moved to a small, temporary apartment. This was it. The final act. I arrived at the lawyer's office early, my heart a drumbeat against my ribs. My lawyer, Sarah, greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "He's here," she murmured, nodding towards the closed door of the conference room. "And he's not happy." A flicker of satisfaction, cold and sharp, pierced through my anxiety. Good. He shouldn't be happy. When I entered the room, Mark was already seated, impeccably dressed as always, but with a subtle tension around his eyes, a barely perceptible tremor in his hands. He looked tired and slightly disheveled, in a way only someone who meticulously maintains their appearance would notice. His hair wasn't quite perfect, his tie was slightly askew. Had my campaign of chaos truly taken such a toll? The thought sent a jolt of perverse pleasure through me. He avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the papers laid out before him. The buyers, a young couple, sat opposite him, looking eager and slightly uncomfortable. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah began to explain the final steps, the documents that needed signing. When she came to the deed, the one with his name still on it, a hush fell. Mark cleared his throat. "As per our previous discussions," he began, his voice a little hoarse, "there are still outstanding matters to be resolved before I can sign this." He gestured vaguely at the deed. "The inconvenience, the time lost, the emotional distress this has caused me." He paused, expecting me to flinch, to crumble. But I didn't. I met his gaze, a quiet, unwavering resolve in my eyes. Sarah interjected smoothly, "Mr. Peterson, as you know, the court order explicitly states the terms of the buyout. Any further demands are outside the scope of this agreement." Mark scoffed, a familiar, dismissive sound. The court order didn't account for the ongoing harassment, the constant disruptions to my business and personal life. The anonymous calls, the bizarre mail, the strange online activity. It's been a nightmare. I believe I am entitled to compensation for this undue stress. My heart pounded. He was talking about my campaign. He didn't know it was me, but he felt it. He felt the chaos. A triumphant surge of adrenaline coursed through me. He was admitting it, admitting the impact. Sarah looked genuinely confused. Mr. Peterson, we have no record of any such harassment. Have you filed a police report? Provided evidence? He waved a dismissive hand. It's subtle, untraceable, but it's real. My clients asking questions. My time is being wasted. My personal life is being interfered with. This is a direct result of this protracted process, and I demand an additional sum to sign these papers and finally be rid of this whole sordid affair. His voice rose, tinged with a desperation I had never heard from him before. He was unraveling, just as I had planned. The satisfaction was intoxicating. The air in the conference room crackled with Mark's thinly veiled rage and my own barely contained triumph. He was unraveling, just as I had meticulously planned, but the public display of his frustration was more satisfying than I could have imagined. His face, usually a mask of calm superiority, was flushed, and his eyes darted around the room, seeking validation that wasn't there. Mr. Peterson, Sarah said, her voice firm but still professional, we are here to finalize the sale of the property as per the existing court order. Your claims of harassment are unsubstantiated and entirely separate from this transaction. If you have evidence of such, you should pursue it through the appropriate legal channels, but it will not impact this closing. Mark slammed his hand on the table, making the young buyers jump. Unsubstantiated. My phone rings off the hook with inquiries about dog grooming and clown services. My inbox is a wasteland of irrelevant newsletters. My social media is being subtly undermined. Someone is clearly trying to make my life miserable, and it only started when this house sale began. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his eyes finally locking onto mine, filled with a raw, unadulterated fury. This is your doing, isn't it? You're trying to punish me. A cold calm settled over me. This was it. The moment of accusation. I met his gaze, my expression carefully neutral. Mark, I said, my voice steady. I have been trying to move on with my life for 2 years. All I want is to sell this house and be free. Your refusal to sign the deed is the only thing prolonging this nightmare, as you call it. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. As for your other claims, I have no idea what you're talking about. Perhaps you've made some enemies elsewhere. Or maybe, I added, a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk touching my lips, your own actions are finally catching up to you. The last phrase hit him like a physical blow. His face contorted, a flicker of fear replacing the rage. He knew. He didn't know how I knew, or what I knew, but he knew that my words carried a deeper meaning, a subtle threat that went beyond the immediate situation. The carefully crafted facade of the wronged party, the innocent victim, crumbled around him. The buyers, clearly uncomfortable, shifted in their seats. The husband leaned over and whispered something to his wife. Sarah, sensing the shift in dynamics, pressed forward. Mr. Peterson, are you going to sign the deed, or are we going to have to involve the court for contempt? Her voice was unwavering. Mark glared at me, his eyes narrowed, searching for a sign of my involvement. But I gave him nothing. I simply held his gaze, a quiet, knowing power radiating from me. He was trapped. He couldn't prove anything, and he couldn't afford to delay the sale further, not with the court's patience wearing thin. The thought of more legal battles, more public scrutiny, more time wasted, was clearly unbearable to him. With a guttural growl of frustration, he snatched the pen from the table. His hand trembled visibly as he scrawled his signature on the deed, a jagged, angry mark that finally, irrevocably, severed his legal tie to the house. The sound of the pen scratching on paper was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It wasn't just a signature, it was the sound of a cage door swinging open. The pen scratching across the paper was the sound of my liberation. Mark's signature, a furious, almost illegible scrawl, was the final, agonizing act of a man defeated, not by direct confrontation, but by 1,000 invisible cuts. He pushed the document away as if it were contaminated, then stood abruptly, knocking his chair back with a loud scrape. "This is not over," he hissed, his eyes burning into mine, a desperate, impotent threat. His voice was low, meant only for me, but the raw venom in it was palpable. I simply raised an eyebrow, a silent, almost imperceptible challenge. "It is for me, Mark," I replied, my voice calm, almost serene. The contrast between his barely contained fury and my quiet composure was stark, and I knew it infuriated him further. He had always thrived on my emotional reactions, on my tears, my despair. Now, he got nothing but a placid, knowing gaze. He stormed out of the conference room without another word, leaving a palpable vacuum in his wake. The young couple, the buyers, exchanged relieved glances. Sarah, my lawyer, let out a long, slow breath. "Well," she said, a small, tired smile gracing her lips, "that was eventful. But it's done, Sarah. You're free." The words washed over me, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. Free. The house, once a symbol of my entrapment, was now truly just a house, a place where someone else would build their dreams. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long began to lift, slowly, exhilaratingly. The rest of the closing was a blur of paperwork, handshakes, and polite congratulations from the buyers. I signed my own name, my hand steady, a stark contrast to Mark's furious scrawl. Each stroke of the pen felt like a reclaiming of myself, a reaffirmation of my strength. As I left the lawyer's office, stepping out into the crisp autumn air, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner. The world felt open, full of possibilities. The house, my former prison, was now officially someone else's responsibility. Mark's name was gone from the deed, gone from my life, at least legally. The Unhinged campaign had served its purpose, and more. It wasn't just about getting him to sign the papers. It was about reclaiming my power, about showing myself that I was not a victim, that I was capable of fighting back, even against a truly narcissistic individual who sought to control every aspect of my existence. The satisfaction wasn't just in his defeat, but in my own quiet victory, my own resilience. I knew the chaos I had unleashed in his life would continue to fester, a slow-acting poison that would chip away at his carefully constructed reality long after our paths diverged. He would never know who was behind it, and that uncertainty would be its own form of exquisite torment. He would forever be looking over his shoulder, wondering, suspecting, never truly at peace. And that, I realized, was a far more potent revenge than any amount of money. I had taken back what was truly mine, my peace of mind, my agency, and my future. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, wonderfully, terrifyingly free. The days that followed the closing were filled with a quiet, almost disorienting sense of peace. The constant hum of anxiety that had been my companion for years finally receded, replaced by a profound stillness. I moved into my small, temporary apartment, a space that felt refreshingly anonymous and unburdened by history. There were no ghosts here, no echoes of a life that had been systematically dismantled. I spent the first few days simply existing, allowing myself to breathe without the suffocating weight of the house, without the looming threat of Mark's next move. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, each item a symbol of my new beginning. The few pieces of furniture I had managed to acquire, the books that had sustained me through the darkest times, the simple comforts that were truly mine. But even in this newfound tranquility, a part of me lingered on the Unhinged campaign. I found myself occasionally checking the obscure forums, the community boards, the review sites where I had planted my seeds of chaos. Not out of a need to continue the torment, but out of a morbid curiosity, a desire to see the ripples of my actions. And the ripples were there. On a local real estate forum, I saw a subtle shift in the tone of discussions about Mark. No direct accusations, of course, but more nuanced observations. Comments like, "He's certainly effective, but I've heard he can be a bit intense," or "great at closing, but maybe not the best for long-term client handholding." The subtle doubts I had sown were taking root, slowly eroding the polished facade he had so carefully constructed. On a community group, I noticed an uptick in anonymous complaints about minor disturbances in his condo building, the very ones I had subtly instigated. Residents were starting to grumble about unexplained late-night deliveries or strange packages appearing in common areas. The collective irritation was growing, and while it wasn't directed at Mark specifically, it was contributing to a general atmosphere of unease in his supposed sanctuary. The most satisfying observations came from his social media. His posts, once filled with effusive praise, now had a few more comments that were just slightly off-key, the kind of backhanded compliments or overly fawning remarks from my fake accounts that would make any discerning reader subtly question the authenticity of his adoration. His carefully curated image was subtly cracking, revealing the manipulative undercurrents beneath. I even saw a few posts from his new friends or associates on their own pages, subtly complaining about unexplained junk mail or weird phone calls. They were experiencing the periphery of the chaos I had unleashed, and it was clear it was causing them confusion and irritation. Mark's carefully cultivated network, built on his image of effortless success, was starting to feel the strain. The knowledge that these subtle disturbances were continuing, that he was still experiencing the slow, creeping sense of his world unraveling, brought a deep, quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about vengeance anymore, not truly. It was about balance. He had taken so much from me, and now he was experiencing a fraction of the confusion, the frustration, the loss of control that he had inflicted. The untraceable nature of it was key. He would forever be looking over his shoulder, wondering who, or what, was behind the subtle erosion of his perfect life. And I, from my quiet, unburdened new apartment, could finally begin to build a life free from his shadow. As the weeks turned into months, the initial surge of satisfaction from my unhinged campaign began to mellow into a profound sense of closure. The immediate aftermath of the closing had been exhilarating, but now a deeper, more sustainable peace settled over me. I focused on rebuilding my life, finding a new rhythm, and slowly healing from the years of emotional trauma. I started a new job, one that offered fresh challenges and a supportive environment. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during the dark days of my marriage and divorce, cautiously opening myself up to new relationships. The small apartment, once temporary, began to feel like home, a sanctuary where I could truly be myself. Periodically, a thought of Mark would surface, usually triggered by an old memory or a fleeting news item. But the thoughts no longer carried the sting of pain or the weight of his control. Instead, they were accompanied by a quiet, almost detached curiosity about the lingering effects of my subtle sabotage. I no longer actively sought out evidence of his discomfort, but occasionally I would stumble upon it. A local news article about a community meeting discussing unexplained disruptions in a downtown condo building. A subtle shift in his online presence, a slight reduction in his boastful posts, perhaps a sign that his carefully curated image was becoming harder to maintain. I even heard through the grapevine, from a mutual acquaintance who was unaware of my involvement, that Mark had been complaining about unusual administrative issues at work and strange, persistent annoyances in his personal life. He was attributing it to bad luck, or perhaps a vague, unspecified enemy. He still had no idea. The beauty of the untraceable nature of my actions was truly profound. He couldn't fight what he couldn't see. He couldn't accuse what he couldn't prove. He was left with a persistent, low-level hum of chaos, a constant questioning of his own reality, a subtle erosion of his sense of control. And that, I realized, was the most perfect revenge of all. It wasn't about inflicting pain, but about restoring balance. It was about him experiencing, in a diluted and untraceable form, the very essence of what he had inflicted upon me. A slow, insidious unraveling of a carefully constructed life, without understanding why. My focus shifted from revenge to recovery, from plotting to living. The unhinged phase had been a necessary catharsis, a way to channel my rage and despair into something productive, something that gave me back a sense of agency. But now, it was time to let it go. The house was sold. The deed was signed. The past was finally, truly, in the past. I found myself smiling more, genuinely. The laughter came easier. The future, once a terrifying blank slate, now felt like an exciting adventure. I had survived, I had fought back, and I had won. Not just the battle for the house, but the war for my own soul. I was free, utterly and completely, and the quiet hum of the universe felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely my own. The finality of the house sale and the subsequent quietude in my life allowed me to reflect on the journey I had taken. The unhinged phase, born out of desperation and heartbreak, had transformed into something unexpected, a powerful act of self-reclamation. It wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about me. I realized that the meticulous planning, the creative problem-solving, and the sheer audacity of my actions had awakened a part of me that had been dormant for years, buried under the weight of Mark's control and manipulation. I had always been the compliant one, the one who avoided conflict, who sought peace at any cost. Mark had exploited that, twisting my desire for harmony into a weapon against me. But in pushing me to the absolute brink, he had inadvertently forged a new strength within me. The revenge wasn't about him suffering grandly. It was about him experiencing the subtle, pervasive erosion of control that he had inflicted on me for so long. It was about him feeling the nagging uncertainty, the inexplicable annoyances, the quiet questioning of his own reality. And the fact that he would never know the source, that he would forever attribute it to bad luck or vague enemies, was the ultimate irony. He, the master manipulator, was being manipulated by an unseen hand, a ghost in his machine. I thought about the pets he had taken. The cats, my silent companions. That pain still lingered, a dull ache that would likely never fully disappear. But even that, I realized, was part of the fuel that had driven me. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about the callous disregard for life, for connection, for the things that truly mattered. My unhinged acts were a response to that deeper betrayal, a way to assert that such cruelty would not go unpunished, even if the punishment was subtle and psychological. My new life was unfolding, slowly but surely. I found joy in simple things: a quiet cup of coffee in the morning, a walk in the park, conversations with genuine friends. The emptiness of the house had been replaced by the fullness of my own potential. I was no longer defined by my past, by my divorce, or by the man who had tried to break me. I was defined by my resilience, by my newfound strength, and by the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had navigated the storm and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. The memory of Mark's face in the lawyer's office, contorted with confusion and impotent rage, was a powerful reminder of how far I had come. He had wanted to control me, to dictate my future, to extract every last ounce of my spirit. But instead, I had taken back my narrative. I had rewritten the ending to his cruel story, turning his final act of control into the catalyst for my ultimate liberation. And in doing so, I had found a profound sense of peace that no amount of money or property could ever buy. The house was gone, but my freedom was absolute. As I settled into my new life, the echoes of my unhinged campaign grew fainter, replaced by the vibrant sounds of my own burgeoning future. The satisfaction of having turned the tables on Mark, of having inflicted 1,000 untraceable cuts, remained a quiet undercurrent, but it no longer defined my days. My focus had shifted from what he had taken to what I was building. I found a small, local community center where I started volunteering, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time or emotional energy for during my marriage. It was a simple act, helping with administrative tasks and organizing events, but it connected me to people who genuinely cared about their community, people who were kind and authentic. It was a stark contrast to the superficial, self-serving circles Mark inhabited. I also began exploring new hobbies. I took up painting, something I had dabbled in as a teenager but abandoned under Mark's dismissive gaze. The act of putting brush to canvas, of creating something purely for the joy of it, was incredibly therapeutic. Each stroke felt like an act of defiance against the man who had tried to stifle my creativity and dim my spirit. The colors on the canvas were bright, vibrant, a reflection of the renewed hope within me. Therapy, which I had started during the divorce, continued to be an invaluable tool. My therapist helped me process the lingering trauma, to understand the dynamics of narcissistic abuse, and to fully embrace the healing process. We talked about the unhinged phase, and she acknowledged it as a powerful, albeit unconventional, way for me to reclaim agency and process my anger. It had been a necessary step, a bridge from victimhood to empowerment. I learned to trust my instincts again, something Mark had systematically eroded. His gaslighting had made me question my own sanity, my own perceptions. Now, I listened to that quiet inner voice, allowing it to guide my decisions, big and small. This newfound self-trust was perhaps the greatest gift of my journey. Sometimes, a fleeting thought of Mark would cross my mind. I wondered if the subtle chaos I had unleashed was still a persistent hum in his life. I imagined him, still meticulously dressed, still outwardly successful, but perhaps with a permanent furrow in his brow, a subtle paranoia in his eyes, forever wondering why his perfectly ordered world felt just a little bit off. The thought brought a small, knowing smile to my lips. He would never know, and that was the true genius of it. He would never have the satisfaction of knowing who had orchestrated his quiet torment, or why. My life was no longer about him. It was about me, about my growth, my healing, my future. The house was a distant memory, a chapter closed. The pain had faded, replaced by resilience. The betrayal had transformed into strength. I was no longer the heartbroken woman seeking revenge. I was a woman reborn, ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in my ability to navigate the world on my own terms. My story was no longer about his control, but about my absolute, undeniable freedom. The journey from heartbreak to healing was not linear, but it was undeniably progressive. Each day, I felt a little lighter, a little stronger. The empty house, once a symbol of my loss, had become a distant echo, replaced by the vibrant reality of my new, self-designed life. The Unhinged campaign, born from a primal need for justice, had served its purpose, allowing me to channel my rage into action and reclaim a sense of control. I found myself increasingly drawn to helping others who had experienced similar forms of abuse. I discreetly joined online support groups, not to seek help for myself anymore, but to offer a listening ear, to share insights from my own journey, and to validate the experiences of others who felt trapped and unheard. I never spoke of my unhinged tactics, of course, but I shared the message of resilience, of finding inner strength, and of the importance of reclaiming one's narrative. It was a way to turn my pain into purpose, to ensure that my suffering was not in vain. My relationships deepened. I cultivated friendships based on genuine connection and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the transactional and superficial interactions that had characterized my marriage. I learned to identify red flags, to trust my gut instincts, and to protect my peace. The fear of being alone, which Mark had so skillfully exploited, had vanished, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own company. I even started dating again, cautiously at first. It was a strange and sometimes awkward process, but it was also liberating. I approached it with a new sense of self-awareness, no longer seeking validation or completion from another person, but simply looking for companionship and shared experiences. I was no longer afraid to set boundaries, to speak my truth, or to walk away from anything that didn't serve my well-being. The thought of Mark occasionally surfaced, but it was like a faint, distant signal, barely registering on my radar. I no longer harbored active ill will. The desire for revenge had transformed into a quiet, almost detached satisfaction. I knew the untraceable chaos I had sown in his life would continue to be a persistent, low-level irritant, a constant reminder that his world wasn't as perfectly controlled as he believed. He would never fully understand why things felt slightly off, why his carefully constructed image was subtly cracking, and that uncertainty would be his enduring torment. My life was no longer defined by the trauma of my past, but by the promise of my future. The bitter taste of betrayal had been replaced by the sweet taste of freedom. I had learned that true power came not from controlling others, but from reclaiming control over oneself. The house, the divorce, the Unhinged campaign. They were all chapters in a larger story, a story of resilience, transformation, and ultimately, triumph. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a thriver, and a woman who had found her own unique way to reclaim her peace. My journey was complete, and the future was bright.